So last night, in the verses that we were covering, we were talking about how things are conditioned. Remember? How the person doesn't think, oh, I'm going to get angry, and so we don't get angry. You know, there's not like we're not self-governed and choose to get angry. And anger itself doesn't have the motivation to arise. And so we talked about how everything happens due to causes and conditions. And so because of that, it doesn't make any sense to get mad at other people, because nobody really has the intention to get angry. Nobody really, you know, from their own side, as an autonomous agent, has the intention to disturb other living beings. Okay, it's more that just due to causes and conditions. You know, anger arises due to causes and conditions. A person does something that's harmful to others. So then you might think, okay, well, if that means that because everything's conditioned and things don't have their own intention to arise and cause trouble, does that mean that when people do bad things, we don't do anything about it because we don't get angry? We just say, oh, well, it was all arose due to causes and conditions, and so-and-so punched so-and-so, and so-and-so cheated so-and-so, and it was all just due to causes and conditions. So no reason to get angry, no reason to do anything about it. Is that what Shantidev is talking about? Did anybody have that question last night when you thought about the teachings? Yeah? It's an interesting question, isn't it? If we don't get angry, does that mean we just let, okay, you know, there's thieves, there's criminals, there's cheaters, there's all sorts of people. Well, we don't get mad. They do it out of causes and conditions. Just let it be. That would really be rather stupid, wouldn't it? Yeah. If someone is doing something harmful, we want to avoid getting angry at them, because when we're angry, we don't think clearly. And when we don't think clearly, then we create more of a mess than was there to start with. Okay, so we practice these techniques in order not to get angry. But if we don't get angry, does that mean that we don't interfere and do something if someone is doing something that's harmful to others? It sure doesn't mean that, no. If somebody's doing something harmful, we should do what we can to stop it, but we do that without being angry. Okay? So sometimes it actually takes a great deal of courage to interfere and stop somebody who's doing harm. Yeah? Because when we do so, that person may get mad at us. Yeah? For example, if there's somebody who has a problem with some kind of addiction, maybe they're an alcoholic, or they're addicted to prescription drugs, or they have a gambling addiction, or even a shopping addiction. Did you know that in America now, shopping can be an addiction? I better not say that in Singapore. They won't let me back in the country. You know, but there's considering these things, you know, addictions. So let's say there's somebody who has that kind of addiction, and it's really damaging them and damaging their whole family. Do we just say, oh, well, it's due to causes and conditions, so I don't get angry at them, and let it be? I don't think that's very compassionate. You know, if somebody has a problem like that, they really need help. And if we're in a position to help, we need to step forward and help. Of course, sometimes people with addiction problems, they get mad at the people who try and help them. And they say, why are you meddling in my business? I'm going to do what I want to. Just give me money. You know, because they always want money for whatever addiction problem they have. Just give me some money, but leave me alone. Yeah, so does that mean that we practice generosity and give them money so they can go gambling and drinking? No. Yeah. You say no. When somebody's doing something harmful, you say no, but you can say no without being mad at them. But like I said, sometimes it takes a great deal of courage to say no to somebody like that because they may get mad at us. Yeah? But, you know, if we're really working on developing compassion, we have to be willing to go through difficulties to benefit other living beings. And if they get mad at us, so be it. You know, we're willing to accept that because our purpose is to benefit them. Okay, it's a very important point. Think about it, because lots of times, you know, we see people doing things that aren't so good, and it's like, well, they shouldn't be doing that, but I don't want to say anything because then I might get in trouble. Okay, that shows how much we lack compassion. At other times, when it's actually none of our business, then we want to intervene and say something. Yeah, because we're mad and we're revved up and I'm going to ruin that guy's reputation and say something, and yeah. Okay, so we often have everything completely upside down. When it's not appropriate for us to intervene, we intervene. And when it is appropriate and compassionate to intervene, we lack any courage whatsoever. Very interesting. Yeah. This is why they say that we're under the influence of ignorance. Yeah. This is why we're said to be under the control of ignorance. Okay, so let's continue on with the verses. We finished up to chapter 26 last night. We're going to start chapter 27. I'm sorry, verse 27, not chapter. And this next little section of verses is talking about refuting that causes with self-power exist. So what this means is, if we think that there's causes that produce results, but those causes are under their own power, or they're permanent, or they have the intention to produce a result, that such kind of causes can't exist. So this next section is a little bit difficult because it has to do with refuting one of the ancient Indian philosophies called Samkhya. And these Samkhyas believe that there was something like a primal substance. In other words, some kind of universal cosmic substance out of which everything in the universe is made. But this cosmic substance is permanent, which means that it doesn't arise due to causes and conditions. And the Samkhyas also talk about a soul or a self, something that really is the person, that also is permanent and isn't influenced by causes and conditions. So both of these kinds of things, a primal substance and a permanent soul or self, the Buddhists say those things don't even exist. Okay? So the Buddha actually spent a good bit of time when he was alive conversing with people who had other philosophies and helping them to see their wrong views and the errors in their ways of thinking. And so as time went on in India, this tradition continued. And at the great monastic universities such as Nalanda or Vikramasila, Odantapuri, these places, then there was the tradition of having debate against non-Buddhists to see whose views could withstand reasoning and logic. Okay. And so some of you may have been to the Tibetan communities in India, and you see the monks and nuns are still debating. And debate is used very much as a pedagogical tool to help people sharpen their intelligence and their ability to think clearly. Okay, but we'll just go through this next set of, there's just 5 verses. We'll go through them quickly, and I'll point out the important points in these verses. So verse 27 says, that which is asserted as primal substance, in other words, that universal cosmic energy that makes everything, and that which is imputed as a self, in other words, a permanent self or soul, since they are unproduced, means they aren't dependent on causes and conditions, they do not arise after having purposefully thought, I shall arise in order to cause harm. Okay? So there's no such thing as a permanent cause like a self or a primal substance that can get angry or produce a result of anger or a negative action, because anything that is permanent does not change due to causes and conditions. That's the meaning of permanent in Buddhism. It doesn't mean eternal. It means it doesn't arise and cease due to causes and conditions. So that's one important thing to really remember from this series here, is that something that is permanent does not produce causes and conditions, okay? And something that is permanent can't change to produce something else. So that kind of thing would also apply to, let's say, a creator which is permanent, because if a creator is permanent and isn't dependent on causes and conditions, then that creator can't create, because creation involves change, and permanence means something doesn't change. Okay? Verse 28 says, if they are unproduced and non-existent, then whatever wish they have to produce harm will also not exist. Since this self would permanently apprehend its object, it follows that it would never cease to do so. So this is one of the arguments that is refuting like something such as a permanent self or a permanent soul or a permanent cause. Because if something were a cause, meaning it produced a result, but it was permanent, then either it would never produce that result because it didn't change, or if it could still produce a result, it would never cease producing that result. Okay? Because it never ends. And then verse 29 says, furthermore, if the self were permanent, it would clearly be devoid of action like space. So even if it met with other conditions, how could its underlying nature be affected? So some people might say, well, you could have a cause like a permanent self, and it's down deep it's permanent, but superficially it changes. And Shantideva says, that's nonsense. How can something be unchanging on a deep level and changing on a superficial level? If it changes, it changes. And if it doesn't change, it doesn't change. So something is either permanent or it's impermanent. It can't be both. That's what he's talking about there. And then verse 30 says, even if when acted upon by other conditions, it remains as before, then what could actions do to it? So if there were a self that were permanent, then actions, other people's actions or causes or conditions, couldn't influence it to get angry. Thus, if I say that this condition acts upon a permanent self, how could the two ever be causally related? Okay, so the whole point here is that everything that produces suffering depends on other factors. Yeah, and that these other factors also arise due to causes and conditions. In other words, we can't talk about any kind of permanent causes, be it a permanent soul or a permanent cosmic substance or a permanent creator, because permanence is the complete opposite of the ability to create and to cause results. And then the last verse in this section says, hence, everything is governed by other factors, which in turn are governed by others. And in this way, nothing governs itself. Having understood this, I should not become angry with phenomena that are like apparitions. Okay, so everything that produces suffering is dependent on other factors, right? And all those other factors are dependent on other factors. Okay, so for example, if I say harsh words, that produces suffering in another person. Okay, but my harsh words depend on causes and conditions. Yeah, they depend on me being in a bad mood. They depend on me getting angry. They depend on the person standing in front of me. Okay, I don't just say, harsh words to empty space. Yeah, there's all these other conditions that influence me. Yeah, so that shows that I don't exist under my own power. I'm not self-governing, but instead I'm affected by causes and conditions. And those causes and conditions also are affected by causes and conditions. Why do I get mad today? Because I have the habit of getting mad. A habit means I got mad in the past. Those are the conditions that make me get mad today. I have a habit of getting mad. Plus I have the seed of anger in my own mind. Plus I have a mind that misinterprets things and sees danger where there's no danger. So due to all these conditions, then my anger arises and I say something hurtful. Okay? It's not that independent of everything else, I, self-powered, say, I want to hurt somebody. It's not like that. It's due to causes and conditions. Okay? So everything that produces things does not have any self-power. It does not govern itself. So it does not have the ability to produce suffering or any kind of result from its own power. Okay? So that means it's dependent. If it's dependent, it means it's empty of independent existence, because something can't be dependent and independent at the same time. Okay? So things that are empty of independent or inherent existence appear to us, are actually like illusions, because they appear to us to be independent, but actually they're dependent. So the way they appear is mistaken in the same way that the way an illusion appears to us is mistaken. That's what we're getting at right here. Okay? So by understanding that things are empty of independent existence, yet arise dependent on other factors, then we don't get angry at things that are like illusions that appear independent but are in fact dependent. And if we train ourselves well to realize dependent arising and conditionality on one hand, and emptiness of independent existence on the other hand, if we train ourselves to understand these two things well, then we'll be able to actually overcome the ignorance that lies at the root of all of our suffering. Okay, so that's the point of this section. Like I said, it's a little bit difficult section, but I think I gave you the main points there. So now, with verse 32, this we're moving on to another topic that's called the need to counteract anger. Okay, so somebody raises the question and says, but if everything is unreal, like an illusion, then who is there to restrain what anger? In other words, if everything's like an illusion, the anger's like an illusion, and who am I to restrain? Then I must be like an illusion too. So how can me, who's like an illusion, restrain anger that's like an illusion? That's this person's question. And Shantideva says, because that person says, surely in this case restraint would be inappropriate. And Shantideva says it would not be inappropriate because conventionally I must maintain that in dependence upon restraining anger, the stream of suffering is severed. In other words, okay, because ignorance is empty of inherent existence, and suffering is also empty of inherent existence, by realizing this, that everything is empty of independent existence, that both of these are empty and yet both of them function dependent on causes and conditions, by realizing this, our ignorance and all the other afflictions can be eliminated. So that's something good, isn't it? Yeah. So he's really pointing us to the, some important things to contemplate are conditionality and dependence and emptiness on the other hand. Okay? Then verse 35 is a summary of this section. So he says, so when one sees an enemy or even a friend committing an improper action, by thinking that such things arise from conditions, I shall remain in a happy frame of mind. That's nice, isn't it? So when we see people, doing harmful actions, instead of saying, that person is deliberately trying to harm me, they wish me evil, they want to destroy me, because when we say things like that, we're assuming that that person, under their own power, generates the intention to harm somebody. But what this whole section has been saying is that things don't exist under their own power. Things exist due to causes and conditions. So a person doesn't say, under their own power, oh, I want to hurt somebody's feelings. If they have a malicious thought, that malicious thought arose due to causes and conditions, not because the person is some kind of independent entity. Okay, that's the point we're getting at here. And verse 34 is, if things were brought into being by choice, then since no one wishes to suffer, suffering would not occur to any embodied creature. Okay, and that's really true, and this is really going completely the opposite to our mind that likes to blame people and say they want to hurt me, they want to destroy me, they want to embarrass me. Yeah? No, they don't. It happens due to causes and conditions. And like Shantideva says here, okay, if things were brought into existence by choice, in other words, not by causes and conditions, okay, then since no one wishes to suffer, suffering would not occur to any embodied being. So even the person who harms us, why does somebody harm us? They harm us because they're suffering. If people really existed as independent entities and could control all of their thoughts, then since they didn't wish to suffer, they would just stop all their suffering immediately. And if they stopped their suffering, they would have no reason to harm us. And so then there would be no harm to them and no harm to us or to any other living being. Yeah? And if we really think about it, it's true. Nobody wants to suffer. If people really had an independent self that could control everything, nobody would choose to harm anybody else, because nobody would choose to suffer themselves. And our motivation for causing pain to somebody else is our own suffering. And the effect of causing pain to somebody else is also our own suffering. So if we could really choose, we wouldn't hurt anybody at all. And nobody at all would hurt us either. Yeah. Try thinking about that regarding somebody whom you've been holding a grudge against for a long time. Yeah. Somebody who in your mind you keep saying, oh, they're so mean, oh, they're so nasty, they're trying to get me, I can't stand them. Yeah. Think of somebody who you feel that way about, and then think, are they choosing to suffer? Are they choosing to get angry? No, they're just getting angry due to causes and conditions, because their anger makes them miserable. And since they want to be happy, if they really had any choice, they wouldn't get angry. Yeah. And try really thinking that about somebody who you have a lot of bad feelings towards. And see if in the process of thinking like that, you can let go of some of those bad feelings and that blame. Because it's really to your own advantage to let go of these grudges, isn't it? Because when you hold a grudge, who suffers? The other person doesn't suffer. They're out, doing something with their friends. Who suffers when you hold a grudge? When you think every day, oh, they did this to me. Oh, I want to get even. Who's suffering every day when you think that? You're suffering. Okay, so holding on to a grudge, holding on to that kind of anger is harming yourself. So who wants to harm ourselves? Yeah, if we really care about ourselves, then we give up our hatred and our grudges, and we forgive other people. So forgiving is something we do for ourselves. Forgiving benefits ourselves. Okay? Think about this. Yeah, if you really think about it deeply, you can do some major change inside and let go of a lot of things. Okay, now with verse 35, we're moving into another section, and this section is called Cultivating the Fortitude of Being Indifferent to Harm. Okay, So we remember we were talking about 3 kinds of fortitude: to endure suffering, to think about the Dharma, and to endure harm. So we talked about, the first night we talked about enduring suffering. Last night we talked about the fortitude to think about the Dharma, and we talked about that early tonight too, thinking about dependent arising and emptiness. Now we're going to think about the 3rd kind of fortitude, the fortitude that can endure harm. And this is a very, very precious teaching, because harm is always coming our way, isn't it? We all want to be happy, and yet we all have problems. And we do everything we can to not have problems, and problems just come to us anyway, unasked for, uninvited. So if we're able to master this teaching and develop the fortitude, regarding harm, then we will be able to have a completely smooth, calm mind, no matter what we encounter in life. Praise, criticism, beating, approval, disapproval, good reputation, bad reputation, we'll be able to just have a mind that is smooth, no matter how other people treat us. Wouldn't that be nice? To stop being an emotional yo-yo? Up, down, up, down, up, down. People could call me names, they can call you names, they can criticize you. Your mind is completely calm. I want to be like that. So Shantideva is teaching us how. This is the section. So the first verse says, through not being careful or conscientious, people even harm themselves with thorns and other things. And for the sake of obtaining women and the like, things such as wealth, they become obsessed and deprive themselves as food. Okay, so if people don't have a lot of wisdom, if they're not very conscientious and don't know what causes happiness and what causes suffering, then some people have a lot of wrong views about what the path to liberation is. And they think that standing on one foot for days on an end will lead you to liberation, or starving themselves will lead to liberation, or taking thorns and sticking them in yourself will lead to liberation. So, people will even harm themselves in a misdirected way to find liberation from suffering. Yeah? I mean, this is very much what an addict does. Somebody who's an alcoholic or who abuses drugs, and here I mean also prescription drugs, who takes too many tranquilizers or codeine or sleeping pills or, all sorts of pills like that. Okay? Those people, even though they want to be happy, in their attempt to be happy, they're doing what makes them really miserable. It's true, isn't it? Yeah, somebody who is an alcoholic is trying to be happy, but in the process of being an alcoholic, they ruin their relationships, they lose their job, they feel horrible about themselves, they spend a lot of money unnecessarily. Okay? So the point Shantideva is getting at here is people will endure a lot of suffering for things that aren't worth suffering for. Okay? Like having a wrong view and sticking yourself with thorns. Yeah? Or drinking a lot. Or gambling, things like that. People will endure all sorts of suffering in an attempt to be happy. And for the sake of obtaining women and the like, meaning women and like reputation and wealth and things like that, people become obsessed and deprive themselves of food. So it's true, if somebody is like completely in love with somebody, it's like, oh, you're in love with somebody. I'm thinking about that person all day, all night. You don't eat, all you do is like, who's that person talking to on their cell phone? Where are they right now? You want to stalk them and know everything they're doing. Yeah. So people do these kinds of stupid things, don't they? In an attempt to be happy, but it makes them suffer. Okay? Or somebody says, oh, I really love somebody, but to get them to love me, I've got to lose weight. I'm too fat. So you deprive yourself of food. I'm not going to eat so I can be thin so they'll love me. Kind of really stupid. But people think like that. Okay. And then verse 36, and there are some people who injure themselves through the unmeritorious deeds of hanging themselves, leaping from cliffs, eating poison and unhealthy food. So what Shantideva is getting at here is everybody treasures themselves most of all. But often in our ignorance, we harm ourselves, even though we're the one we treasure most of all. How do we harm ourselves? We injure ourselves through unmeritorious actions. Somebody may want to pull off a bank robbery to get a lot of money, to have good status with their friends, and in the process of doing that, they get shot. Happens many times. Okay? People hang themselves. People want to be happy. They're so confused over how to be happy that they think committing suicide will make them happy. It doesn't. It doesn't at all. But, we're so confused sometimes that we use the wrong methods in an attempt to be happy. Some people leap from cliffs. I haven't met a lot of people who do that. Have you? But I can imagine, somebody kind of oh, you know what? There's this one guy who is in a family of people, acrobats, and he's planning to walk across Niagara Falls on a wire that's like this big, One little wire like this big to walk across Niagara Falls. Do you know what happens if you fall? It's not good news if he falls. But, and I really pray he doesn't. But, look at what somebody's doing in order to be happy. Yeah? Would your mother let you do that? My mother wouldn't let me do that. Our mothers will look out for our safety, but sometimes we're really foolish and we do things, that can bring danger to ourselves. People eat poison. Yeah? People poison themselves, and we eat unhealthy food. Perfect example, people who smoke. They want to be happy. What do? They smoke. What does smoking do? It causes lung disease, and it causes a bunch of other health problems. Why are the people smoking? To be happy. What's the result of smoking? Suffering. So Shantideva's whole point is, and I think he's going to speak about this, in the next verse, is that we treasure ourselves so much, and yet because of our ignorance, we do things that harm our treasured self. Hmm? Yeah. Another example, when you're having a quarrel with your husband or wife or boyfriend or girlfriend, what do you really want? You want to be close to that person. What do you say to that person? You're so dumb, you're so stupid, you did this and this and this and this. Is that going to make that person feel close to you? But what we really want is to be close. What are we doing? We're blaming and insulting that person, which creates the opposite result. Why do we do that? Because we're ignorant. It's sad, isn't it? Isn't it sad? Verse 37 says, if, when under the influence of disturbing conceptions or mental afflictions, people will even kill their treasured selves, how can they be expected not to cause harm to the bodies of other living beings? So that's the point he's getting at here. If people, due to their ignorance and confusion, will harm even themselves, how can we expect them not to harm other people? If they don't have any regard, any clear thinking that has regard for their own happiness, how can we expect them to have regard for other people's happiness? They're too confused. So when other people harm us, why get mad at them? We know that they're doing what they're doing just because they're confused. Yeah? And especially if it's somebody you're close to, and they're saying all sorts of hateful, spiteful things to you that really hurt. If you can see beyond that and realize that what your loved one is actually saying is, I want to be close to you because I care about you, but I don't know how to do that. That's what they're actually saying to you. Yeah, through all the yelling and screaming and slamming doors and blaming, that's what they're really trying to say to you, is I care about you, I want to be connected to you, but I don't know how to do it. And so in ignorance, they're doing what creates the opposite result. So if we can really realize this when something's going on, then we don't waste our energy getting angry at the other person. Instead, we can have real compassion for them. Yeah. And even better then is if we can help them realize that what they really want is to be connected. And if they themselves can realize that, then they'll stop the behavior that is so offensive. Verse 38 says, even if I cannot develop compassion for all such people, who through the arisal of disturbing conceptions set out to try and kill me and so forth, the last thing I should do is to become angry with them. So even if I can't have compassion for all those people who are blaming me and accusing me unjustly and saying mean things to me, even if I can't have compassion for them, yeah, can I at least not hate them? Yeah, at least the last thing I should do is be angry with them. So even if they're trying to kill me, to realize that they're doing it out of their own ignorance. Okay. And, we can think of situations like, I think of the Cultural Revolution in China. and how the PLA, the People's Liberation Army, they would go into cities and villages in China and in Tibet, you know, and they would destroy temples, and they would make the monks and nuns put on placards that say Buddhism is stupid, and they made them wear dunce caps and put on lay clothes and walk through the streets. This is what the communist government's army made people do during the Cultural Revolution. It was horrible for the monks and nuns. Yeah. But if you look at it, those, you know, young soldiers who were in the PLA army, from their side, did they really intend to cause harm? You know, why did they join the army? Most of them were from villages and poor families, and they thought joining the army, they would be able to earn some money for their family or get some kind of social status. So all those young men joined the army, thinking it would bring them happiness. And then they were ordered to go in and destroy monasteries and humiliate monks and nuns. And they created all sorts of negative karma in the process of doing that. But should we be angry at them? Yeah? You can't really be angry because you see how ignorant they were. They didn't know, you know, how much negative karma you create through destroying monasteries and interfering with the Sangha. Yeah, so in their attempt to be happy, they created a ton of negative karma. How can we hate them? Yeah? Can we look at those young men and have some kind of compassion, even though they were so ignorant and created such harm for so many people? Yeah? Okay? So what Shantideva is teaching is very important. It really applies to our own life and the situations we see around us. Yeah? And, you know, political situations, any kind of situations. You know, here in Singapore, if you're holding grudges against somebody, you know, you don't like what your neighbor does. Oh, what was it? I heard that somebody brought a court case against their neighbor for cooking curry. And they said, I don't like the smell of your curry, and you should stop cooking curry while I'm at home. And the judge actually ruled that that person, you know, the family that's cooking curry, should not cook curry when their neighbors are at home. This is Singapore. Yeah? Now, what do you think about that? Do you think the family that was cooking curry had the intention to harm anybody else? Of course not. Of course not. Yeah. Should they be allowed to cook curry? Yeah. You know, it's like this is kind of one of your rights, isn't it? You can cook the food you want. But this other family got so upset about that, so mad, that even brought it to court. So we might look at the family who brought it to court and say, oh, stupid people. Yeah, you might even say that about the judge. But maybe we can look at all of those people and have some compassion. Can you imagine being so angersome that you can't endure your neighbor having the pleasure of cooking the food that their family likes? That person must really be suffering if they're going to bring a court case about this. Yeah? Can we have some compassion for that person? I think we can have some compassion and bring them some curry as a present. So here's one question. Buddhism does not believe there is a God. However, Buddhists believe in the presence of deities. Please explain. Okay. When we talk about deities, such as Chenrezig, or Kuan Yin, we're seeing them as emanations of the Buddha. Okay, so they have the same qualities as the Buddha, but they emanate in a different physical form in order to emphasize different virtuous qualities. So by emanating with 1,000 arms, this version of Kuan Yin is really emphasizing reaching out with 1,000 arms to help sentient beings. Yeah? Manjushri, the Buddha of wisdom, Wensupusa, yeah? In the Tibetan version, he has a sword. It's not because he's fighting anybody, it's because he's cutting off ignorance. He's cutting off the cause of our suffering. So all these things are symbolic of the qualities, the internal qualities of a Buddha. So these different Buddhist deities are not creator gods. Yeah, they're not gods that create, they're not gods that manage the universe. They're emanations of Buddha's qualities. Okay? So don't confuse, somebody's saying Buddhism doesn't believe in God, but you believe in deities. But those are two different things. Because the people who believe in God say God created the world. Buddhists do not say that the Buddha or any of these deities created the world. Okay? The people who believe in God say God determines who lives and who dies and what happens to people. The Buddhists who believe in Kuan Yin and Manjushri and so on, we don't say that these deities determine what happens to people and who suffers and who lives and who dies. Okay, so they have completely different characteristics. Okay, so according to the census population of 2010, there was a 9% drop in Singapore of people who identify themselves as Buddhists. Do you have any advice on how to make Buddhism more appealing to people, especially the young? Should we do proselytizing like what other religions do? Or should we focus more on teaching prosperity and blessing, which appeals to most Singaporeans? Okay. I don't think that we should proselytize and force people or threaten people to become Buddhists. I think, going up to somebody and say, well, if you don't become a Buddhist, you're going to go to hell. That's not exactly compassionate, is it? And, as Buddhists, we really value compassion. So I don't think we should threaten people or, disturb people's families or force people in any way. On the other hand, I don't think we should keep it secret that we're Buddhist. Yeah? When people ask us what religion we are, we say we're Buddhist. And if they say, well, how about coming to church with me? You say, thank you very much, I have my own religion. Yeah? I don't want to go to church. And, even at the monastery where I live, we'll sometimes have people ring the doorbell and say, oh, have you heard about Jesus? And it's like, we're a Buddhist monastery. And So I say to them, well, yes, we've heard about Jesus, and we're Buddhist, and if you practice Jesus' teachings on love and compassion, that will be very good for you. That's what I tell them. I don't invite them in. I don't take their books. I just say, please practice what Jesus taught about being patient, being tolerant, being kind, being compassionate. Please practice that. That will benefit you. And I'm completely serious about it. Yeah? And that's it. I have some kind of karma. Sometimes I wind up on airplanes sitting next to people who are trying to convert me. There was this one young man on one flight, and he wanted to, give me his literature. And I was asking him about his family, and he was saying, my mother doesn't understand me, and I don't get along very well with her. But I could understand why, because he was like so pushy in what he was doing. And he really wanted me to take his literature. And I said, oh, well, we're having a very good discussion, and I have some Buddhist literature here, and I'll accept your gift if you will accept my gift and read this Buddhist book. And he sat there. He was like 18 or 19, so he didn't know what to do because somebody else wasn't telling him what to do. And he just kind of sat there, and then he said, no, thank you. And I said, well, then also I won't accept your gift. Yeah? Anyway, that's off the topic. How to, what should we do? I think that as Buddhists, we should, I think the whole thing of publishing books for free distribution is very good. Leave them around your house for your relatives to read. Leave them around your workplace. People may pick them up. Give them to friends who are having problems. You don't have to come on heavy duty like, you got to be a Buddhist, But there's so much in Buddhism that is common sense, that has nothing really to do with religion at all. That somebody who's not a Buddhist can read a Buddhist book and benefit from it and still keep practicing their own religion. We want to benefit people. Yeah? So we give them things that, like all these teachings on patience and fortitude, these have nothing to do with religion, do they? Yeah? It's just teaching us how to work with our own mind, how to cultivate forgiveness and compassion and kindness. Yeah, so let's share these with other people. And I really think education is the key, because when people understand Buddhism, then they really want to practice. Yeah. So even when people go to temples, because some people like to go to temples and do rituals, I think even for the people who like to do that, we should explain the meaning of the rituals. We should explain how to think when you chant. We should explain the meaning of the text that people are chanting. Because when people understand, then their faith is really solid. Yeah, then they really benefit from things. So I think education is so important. And along that line, I think Sunday school for the children is very important. But what I've found is that some parents, they want to leave their child at Sunday school for somebody else to teach them while they go shopping. Well, that's not exactly the way to instill Buddhist values in your child. Yeah, if you want to instill Buddhist values in your child, You have to learn the Dharma and attend Dharma classes yourself, and then discuss what you hear with your child, and teach your child some of the simple things that we do. I had a friend who every morning her little daughter, she would give her daughter, she was maybe like 4 or 5 years old, something, and the little girl would make an offering to the Buddha every day, and she would put this fruit or flowers or something and offer it to the Buddha. And her mother taught her, really take delight in giving things and feel how good it feels to give things away, And so you give this apple to the Buddha. And then every day the Buddha would give the little girl a present too. And it was really sweet, because the little girl developed this relationship with the Buddha. And she learned how to clean the altar. She learned how to bow. Her mother told her that, that the Buddha was somebody who was kind and who you could always depend on for good advice. So even as a child, just explaining simple concepts. But then especially when kids get older, I didn't meet the Dharma until I was 24, and I really wish I had been able to meet the Dharma when I was a teenager, because I was so confused. And I think if I had the ability to meet the Buddha's teachings as a teenager, it would have helped me. I wouldn't have been nearly as confused. Okay, so I think we should really, as a Buddhist community, reach out and stress education. That's really the important thing. And then we should also practice. Yeah, not just come and, hear teachings, but we should really go home and study the teachings, and then we should meditate on them and try and practice them. And, we're each responsible. If we think the Buddha's teachings are something valuable and precious and need to be preserved, then each of us is responsible for preserving them. We can't just say, oh, somebody else will do it. Yeah, if we think that these 2,600 years of, fantastic, amazing teachings on the path that lead us to enlightenment are really true and valuable and precious and good for people to learn, then we should learn them and practice them and help sustain the temples and the communities and that spread them. And we should teach other people through our practice. Yeah. And maybe even some of you should ordain. Imagine that. Yeah. But really, if you think the Dharma is something precious, consider it. I have a friend who is a Taiwanese nun, and at her temple, she told me a lot of times people say, oh, how can we support the Dharma? And so she tells them different ways, and then she says, and you can also ordain. And the people go, oh. Okay. Okay, we did this one. What else do we have here? So suffering arises out of causes and conditions. How about the cessation of suffering and joyous effort? Do they arise out of causes and conditions too? Okay, joyous effort, yes, definitely arises due to causes and conditions. That's why when we get to the chapter on joyous effort here, we learn the ways to think that will encourage joyous effort in our joyous effort in our own mind. When we think of the benefits of the Dharma, when we think of the happiness that we can bring about for ourselves and others, this encourages a lot of joyous effort. So those are the causes of joyous effort, okay? The cessation of suffering, if we really want to cease suffering, we have to generate wisdom. to generate wisdom, we need to hear the teachings and think about them. So those are the causes and conditions to generate wisdom, because wisdom also arises due to causes and conditions. Through wisdom, we're able to cut off the causes and conditions for suffering. Okay? So all these things, this is why I keep saying education's so important. We learn these things, then we meditate, we think about them, we practice them, and then they, really become part of our mind. Somebody on the internet said the end of the world will come by December 21, 2012. What do you think? Baloney. End of question. I don't know how many times they've had predictions of the end of the world. None of them have happened. Please explain what is idiot compassion and how to practice compassion according to the Buddha's teachings. Very good question. Idiot compassion is when we have this really unwise kind of emotional way of thinking of compassion. So idiot compassion would be, for example, you're at a workplace, you're at a store, and somebody comes in and says, I'm absolutely broke, I really need money. So idiot compassion, you take money out of your boss's cash register and you give it to the person. Okay. If it's your own money, fine, do that. If it's your boss's money, that's idiot compassion. Okay. Another example of idiot compassion. Somebody has a problem with gambling and they come and ask you for money and you suspect they're going to use it to gamble. Idiot compassion is you give them the money. Real compassion is you say no. Okay? So idiot compassion is doing things that superficially look like you're being a nice person, but are actually damaging the other person. For example, a parent who gives their child everything. You might think, oh, I'm such a good parent, I give my child everything they want. Is that compassion for your child? No. What the real thing as a parent that you need to teach your child is how to endure the suffering of not getting everything you want. Because who in their life is going to be able to go through life and always have everything they want? No one. So therefore, it's very important that we all learn how to deal with the frustration of not getting what we want. That's an important thing to teach your children. If you always give them what they want, then they start thinking, whatever I want I should get and the world owes it to me, and they become very, very selfish, and then it actually becomes difficult for them to function in society and to get along with other people. Because they're always saying, but I want. And people like that are very difficult, aren't they? Okay. So to benefit true compassion, or to generate true compassion, the Buddha taught two methods. One is called the 7-point cause and effect instruction, and the other is called equalizing and exchanging self and others. So I don't have time to teach those now. When we eventually get to chapter 8 in this book, we'll come to equalizing and exchanging self with others. In the meantime, if you get the book, I think it's out there, it's called Transforming Adversity into Joy and Courage. Chapters 10 and 11 are superb in describing how to generate real compassion. So I strongly recommend that book, Transforming Adversity into Joy and Courage. The teacher on Buddha nature states there is no right or wrong, bad or good, so where does ignorance come from? That is a misunderstanding of the teaching on Buddha nature. Yeah? To say there's no good, there's no bad, you can do everything you want, that is misunderstanding what the Buddha said. Yeah. Because the Buddha's, one of Buddha's strong teachings is that our life is created by our karma, our actions. Our actions have an ethical dimension. What we do creates the cause of what happens to us. Okay? So the actions that bring suffering in the long term are called non-virtuous. The actions that bring happiness in the long term are called virtuous. The Buddha very clearly taught this. Yeah? The teaching on Buddha nature does not say, oh, there's no virtue and non-virtue. That's a very severe misunderstanding. Okay? The Buddha taught that things are not inherently virtuous or non-virtuous. In other words, they're empty of inherent nature. But that doesn't mean that on a conventional level, they aren't virtuous and non-virtuous. Ultimately, independently, we can't find independent virtue and non-virtue. But on a conventional level, day-to-day level, when we're talking about our lives, there's virtue and non-virtue, and there's happiness and suffering, isn't there? Yeah? And we can't deny that. I mean, the people who say, oh, there's no good, there's no bad, but when they're sick, they don't like to suffer. Well, where did their suffering come from? Harmful karma. So, just saying, oh, there's no good, there's no bad, that doesn't make sense. On a conventional level, there is. On an ultimate level, there isn't. But things operate on a conventional level. Okay? Then, okay. We're getting to... Okay, so somebody's saying, due to our craving, we get very attached to the outside world through our 6 consciousnesses. For example, with our eyes, we perceive things dualistically, and this causes many kind of conflicts that cause all kind of suffering and hurt others and ourselves. So how do we purify our mind and attain enlightenment? This is why we learn the teachings on wisdom, why we study, the emptiness of inherent existence. But even more so on a more basic level, because wisdom is the ultimate thing that is going to purify our mind. But on a very fundamental level, when we see how our minds just get completely enamored by external objects, and we get drawn this way and that way, and oh, I'm craving this and I want this and I can't stand that. How we get so reactive to external things. When we see that, then we see that our mind has no control over some of its reactions to external objects. Then one way to start to deal with that at the beginning is to hold ourselves back a little bit and don't have so much contact with external objects. For example, when you're on the internet, don't read the internet ads. Now you think I'm really crazy. But seriously, train yourself not to read the ads on the internet. Train yourself when you're reading the newspaper, don't look at the ads. Because you know every time when you look at the ads, you're going to start craving something. Oh, maybe I should have this. Maybe I should have that. I want to look like this model. I want to look like that model. You know that your mind gets very confused by craving. So train your mind to avoid advertising. Yeah? It's a very good practice, actually. It's difficult at first, but it's actually very good. And you'll find your mind will be much, much calmer. Yeah? Or train your mind so that you don't watch so much TV. Yeah, because all the TV programs, they're all about violence, which is going to stimulate our anger, or sex, which is going to stimulate our craving. Yeah. So rather than, just remain glued to the television like this, do something useful. Yeah. You can recite Om Mani Padme Hum because we're trying to get to 21 million and we need some help. You can read a Dharma book. You can go out and do some volunteer work. Go out and tutor some children, or volunteer in an old folks' home, or volunteer, at a hospital where there's, people need volunteers to cheer up the patients. Do something useful instead of, vegetating in front of the television. Okay? Okay. So I think that's it for this year. We got all the way to... Last year we only did 12 verses. This year we did 26 verses. Wow. So we're up through verse 38. So next year we'll start on verse 39. You can still take it home and read it. There's a lot to read and think about in here, even though I haven't explained it. And you can get the videos from all the previous years when I've taught the first part of the book, and then watch those videos and really learn, because this book is incredible. This is like one of my favorite books. Okay. So I hope you've benefited from the teachings this year, and I hope we will all meet again next year to continue. In the meantime, please practice and review the teachings that you've heard so that they go in deep in your mind. And I also just wanted to extend an invitation to all of you to visit Shravasti Abbey. I know you're all going to go, oh, it's too far, La. You want me to fly all the way here, but you don't want to fly there. But really, it's a very beautiful place. It's in the countryside, very beautiful and peaceful. So I think you would quite enjoy being there and meeting our community and practicing together with our community. So you're all very welcome. And there's a lot of teachings on the website. If you go to tuptenchodren.org or shavasti.org, it's on the back of those web addresses, or on the back of all the materials. Then you'll find lots of teachings, because we have audio teachings, written teachings, videos, all sorts of stuff online. So please, take advantage of that. And also, if you want our community to do prayers for you, there is a form, I don't have it, but it's at the back desk, where you can request prayers for your friends and your relatives, and even your enemies. Wouldn't that be nice? Make some really wonderful dedication prayers for your enemies to be happy. That would be putting this teaching into practice. Because remember we were saying people harm you because they're unhappy? Well, make some dedications so that the people you don't like will have peaceful, calm minds, so that they'll be able to have happy minds. Wouldn't that be nice? Okay? Okay, so we're going to sit quietly for a minute or two, just absorbing and rejoicing what we did. And then let's rejoice at all the good karma, the merit that we and everybody here created. And let's rejoice in the world at all the goodness there is in the world. And then let's send that out into the universe, together with our prayers and aspirations, that everyone be free of all kinds of suffering, all kinds of unsatisfactory conditions, and that everybody can actualize their inner Buddha nature, their Buddha potential, and become fully awakened ones. Due to this merit, may we soon attain the enlightened state of Guru Buddha, that we may be able to liberate all sentient beings from their sufferings. May the precious Bodhi mind, not yet born, arise and grow. May the born have no decline, but increase forevermore. So thank you very much.